So we've been in our country, in our part of the world, which is in Bendigo in Victoria. As you can see, this map is the right way up, and we're right there. We're about 2 hours to the, in this case, the south of Melbourne, to the north of Melbourne, and you can see the vital stats there. You know, when a person like me goes somewhere, the first thing you want to know is what's the latitude? Is it south or north of the equator? So you know where the sun is. What temperature ranges you deal with? What rain variation do you get? You know, what's the lowest? What's the highest? And then what's the average? And then how many sun days you get? Because you need a few days off. We get a lot of days off. So yeah, I'm really glad, having gone to Ireland a few times, that my ancestors emigrated to Australia, because there's no sun over there, none at all. So anyway, that's a bit about where we are, and to give you a bit of context, just in case you didn't know, that's how big Australia is. It's about the same size as the continental US, and we actually have about the same amount of arable land as you do. Right? We both have about 500 million hectares of arable land, so we're about the same. Your yields are higher because you have places like Iowa, which have, you know, deep glacial till soils with lots of minerals, or used to. And summer rainfall. Much of Australia is not summer rainfall, it's winter rainfall, and it's very sporadic. We have an incredibly unreliable rainfall pattern, as I'll discuss. So that gives you an idea about how big Australia is if you're from Europe, because I understand there's about 80 nationalities here, so for some of you that will give you a bit of an idea. So what we do is a few things in our business. One is we do media, so we've got a few media projects on the go. Another thing is that I do farm design and farm development. As was suggested before, we've done about 1,600 properties now in about 45 countries, so we've been very fortunate to do that. We also do event management, and we've come up with quite a few different events. Regenerative, we came up with Regen Ag, or regenerative agriculture courses, Kaline courses, carbon farming courses, carbon economy courses, all these different things. And we've had quite a few people come along to those across the world since we kicked those off in 2007. Like I said, we've done a lot of properties, and we've done pretty dynamic stuff. I mean, that is not the average looking farm, but it's right out of a favourite book of mine, which was written in 160 BC by a bloke called, oh God, I've got all nervous for a moment, Cato. Marcus Aurelius Cato. He wrote in 160 BC a book called De Agricultura. And in that book, he outlined what the ideal farm would be. And it rattled off something like this. That number one, it would have a kitchen garden. Number two, it would have a willow field. Number three, it would have a grain field. Number four, it would have a varied ground. Number five, it would be near a river for traffic. Number six, it would be about 100 acres. Number seven, it'd have plenty of presses and vats. For a lack of those would mean a lack of produce. And so on. It would have an oak wood. It would have all of these elements, right? Now, so often today, our farms don't have but one of those. You know, they might just have a road going by. They don't have plenty of labour. That's another thing. You know, they don't have an acorn wood. They don't have a willow field for fuel. They don't have they don't have oil trees. They don't have all of these things. They just have one crop. And so they're incredibly vulnerable. And so that to me was, when I read that 20 odd years ago, that just further stimulated in me the sort of way we need to rekindle all of this as we move into especially an era of expensive fossil fuels. So we've done a lot of stuff. We've worked for candy companies. Many of you would know Snickers and Mars bars and all of them. Well, we've worked with them. We've worked with Shell. We've done environmental management plans and forestry developments for Shell. So we've worked with all of these. I'm basically a land management slut, I've been described. And if someone comes along, or I've been described as a permaculture mercenary at times as well by some people. Somebody has to do it, I put it. Yeah, it's hard work, but someone has to do it. So we mentioned we've done, we've also, and I'll get through all these little points, these annoying presses, we've done some big projects. This one's a reasonable one. You can see from space, that's the fence around the perimeter. Yeah, about 1 million hectares, 2.5 million acres. We got that wrong, but what's a million acres between friends? But so everything in between. You get the picture. All right, now this thing, what we've come up with after years of playing with it. Well, when I say we, it's usually me. 3 o'clock in the morning when I get up. Thing I came up with a few years ago was this thing called the Regen 10, and what I was trying to get in my head was some sort of process. I'm a design scientist, so any design science needs a process. And so I've looked at the holistic management stuff, the permaculture stuff, all of this different stuff, the Kaline stuff. And I finally came down to these 10 points as being the things that really define the process logic of how we go through things. And we've got quite a few people who are now beta testing this, you might say, people who are similar to myself or those who I mentor. And I'll go through those 10: climate, geography, water, access, forestry, buildings, fencing, soils, marketing and energy. This is my Cato's list, right? So we'll start with climate. Now, climate is, as we would describe, is at once something that the biosphere delivers to us, so the interaction between the temperatures of the sea close to us, how far we are from the sea, so continental effects, what our latitude is, all of these different things, what our altitude is, how much tree cover we have, all of these things that influence climate. That's the biospheric climate. So we call that the rules of the game. But there's another part to this, and that's the climate of the human head, right? The human attitude, what you actually bring to the plate. That is as much of a climate issue as anything else. It's as difficult, we've found, to change the human climate as it is to change the biospheric climate. And so we think that that's very, very, very important to get sorted out from the get-go. And if we're going to do anything as far as changing the way humans interact with the landscapes we involve ourselves with, then that's something that we've got to get right now, right? Whether that's making changes as to your purchasing choices as consumers, or as producers, changing the way we determine the production systems on our properties. So there's all of these different things we need to sort out. Fortunately, amongst all of this, I'm just standing on the shoulders of tons of other people who had a big crack at all of this stuff. And a lot of those people are your country people here in the US. We take a lot of inspiration from. A Zimbabwean by the name of Alan Savory is one such person who we've taken a lot of inspiration from in terms of getting the decision-making model out of the way. That's really important. If we don't, humans are classic, just disgraceful at making decisions. We usually make decisions based on what other people think, or is this a straight enough line, or does it follow this or that parameter, as opposed to making a set of holistic decisions. So holistic management, as we'll describe, does that very well as anything we've found. Permaculture design is, again, a sort of a holistic framework of integrated design based on a system of ethics, which are care of the earth, care of the people, and return of surplus. And then a whole range of different design principles, everything from the use of biodiversity, that everything gardens, that each element of a design should fulfil many functions, and there's many more of these. So it's a very good design science. Oops. We also have Kaline. Kaline is a precursor to both holistic management and permaculture. It was developed by another Australian, as was permaculture. It was developed by two Australians, by a guy called P.A. Yeomans, Percival Alfred Yeomans, but he preferred, for obvious reasons, to be called P.A. And he was a mining geologist, and he was the first person in the world to come up with a functional, integrated landscape design system for broad-scale landscape development and management. And he did that in the late 40s. He was heavily influenced by the likes of Andre Bresson, who invented rotational grazing, Aldo Leopold. Yeah? He came out here and had meetings with Louis Bromfield and learned about how to use a chisel plough and how to use a chisel plough in soil conservation and soil creation. Soil conservation, which was developed here by the Army Corps of Engineers in the 1930s, and so on. Plus many, many, many other people, Sir Albert Howard, etc. So lots of these people integrate a lot of these different methodologies, as I do, but then make their own. Kaline was one of them. ZERI is another system that we look at, Zero Emissions Research and Initiatives. It's a great system, zeri.org, led by a guy called Gunter Pauli, and based on the work primarily of a Chinese Mauritian called Dr. George Chan, who developed highly integrated and functional agricultural systems throughout China and Southeast Asia in particular, and the Polynesian islands. Paul Stamets, another American from the West Coast. I think actually he's originally from Ohio, but he works over in Fungi Kingdom of the northeast over there, northwest, pardon me, in Washington, Oregon, over that way. He is a genius who's come up with a whole, he's enlivened this whole world of mycology and shown us so well that we can unravel these novel molecular structures that we've been so insidiously producing for the last 100-odd years. What a way out. He's found us. Then we've got people like, again, Dr. John Todd here with his systems, living machine systems, which I was talking to Lonnie about the other day, looking at getting him here at some stage. And also a colleague of mine in the UK, a guy called Jay Abrahams. Have a look up for him. biologicdesign.co.uk. Fascinating low entropy water treatment plants that basically produce drinking water without any energy at all, just using plants and a minimum amount of infrastructure. It's breathtaking stuff. And he deals with the largest systems of effluent that you can imagine. Carbon farming is something that we've, in Australia and here in the US, are probably at the peak in the world in terms of the different techniques of what we call carbon farming. That is, carbon farming is about drawing down the atmospheric carbon pollution that we have and putting it back where it belongs, and that is in the soil. In Australia, you may not know, but we have a carbon tax, which is very, very contentious. But a very interesting part of that carbon tax, which is fixed at a rate of $23 per tonne, and the top 500 polluters in our country have to pay it. So all of the energy companies have to pay it. 5% of the revenue of that goes to farmers, to the Carbon Farming Initiative. So that now means that farmers can now sequester carbon and be paid for it. And we've got some farmers, as I'll show you, who are sequestering 30 plus tonnes of carbon dioxide per hectare per year, right? So they're no longer farming wheat or sheep or corn or whatever else. They're farming carbon dioxide. We need to do that, right? So as we'll talk about. So, and then we've got the transition network, and we're talking with those guys about how we can have not just transition towns, but also transition agriculture. Because you can't have a transition urban society without a transitioning rural society. And we've all got to come together there, as we'll discuss. So the holistic management stuff is very interesting. As you can see here, I won't go through this chart, but some of the things there in terms of the way we don't make decisions are listed there. Like humans aren't very good at looking at causes, we're very good at looking at effects. Alan Savory, the developer of holistic management, says in a video he's got a pretend hammer and he hits himself in the head. And he says, what's the usual human reaction to hitting yourself, to when you hit yourself in the head? Well, you get a headache. What do you do first? Well, you grab a pill, you grab an aspirin, right? And then you keep hitting yourself in the head and Tylenol, Nurofen, because now you've got some inflammation, and so on. And then you end up on morphine and the rest of the opiate derivatives, and by that stage you're sort of still hitting yourself, zonked off your head, but you haven't stopped hitting yourself, because we're really good at taking the pill, but not taking the hammer away. Yeah? And so often that's how we deal with our landscape development and the management of our own lives and the decisions that we make. So we've got to show some guts and actually start to work on some effects, and that works across the whole realm of society. We've also got to deal with weak links. We've got to identify what the social, biological and financial weak links are in a system. We've got to look at, if we're going to do things, then get the best marginal reaction, get the best profit out of each one of those. And profit it can come in a lot of different ways. If you listen to or read about Ethan Rowland's 8 forms of capital, check him out. Appleseed permaculture, a bright young mind in this country. He has come up with all of these different forms of capital, from spiritual capital to, most of us think of just financial capital, but there's environmental capital. There's all of these different forms. So we want to look at all of that in terms of the profit of what we're doing. We need to look at the best way to use our energy and our money. And is a decision that we're making sustainable? Well, as I said to our dinner last night, I really can't stand this word sustainable. I'm sorry you've got lots of labels here that say sustainable or sustainable centre. Sustainability is a really good target to have, because currently, if we look at the state that we're in a state of atrophy, right? Being a recovering Roman Catholic, we're always talking about trinities. And we have one trinity here, which is atrophy, sustainability, regeneration. So I would ask all of you, as I asked last night, all of you who are in a relationship, would you describe your relationship as sustainable? Doesn't really sound right, does it? I've had a few people who say just. Yeah, that doesn't sound too good to me. I want a relationship that's regenerative, one that's getting better, has a bit of disturbance occasionally to get it going, because that's what things need. But that to me is more of a test. Is something regenerative? Is it not just treading water? Sustainability basically means energy in for energy out. What's the effect of our decisions on society and culture, right? So when you look at it in that framework, you've got a pretty broad brush that you've covered. We'll go on. So geography is the next thing that we're looking at, and we say that this is the board game. So if the climate creates the rules, well, the geography, the terroir, the terrain, the interaction between the landscape and its people and its systems is really the board game. And in some cases that's snakes and ladders, and in other cases it's trouble. In other cases it's monopoly. Sometimes it's unfortunately Trivial Pursuit. And some cases also it's all of the above. So we need to look at that. So we have to think about what sort of landscape do we want to live in? Do we want to live in a landscape that photosynthesises for the longest possible period so that we can take advantage of the energy that we get from the sun in its freest form? Do we want to have a landscape that has plenty of water in it? That when the water that lands on our systems actually leaves it cleaner, as opposed to leaving it more polluted? Do we want it to produce cleaner air? Do we want it to enable us to have a regenerative, localised agricultural system? All of these questions, we have to ask that. What do we want? Because it's up to us to create that. So you have to start with a goal. Fortunately, when it comes to the techniques to analyse landscape and make some of the decisions that we do on landscape development, we have lots of tools. We do a lot of surveying. We need to know what the shape of our landscape is in order to be able to tame it, bring it under some sort of control, especially when it comes to water, as we'll discuss. And you know, these days, it's so cheap. We use a service in Australia, and I'm sure you've got similar ones here, that costs about $4 an acre or $3 an acre to do 1 foot contour maps. Right? That's never been possible before, but now you can. So the broader scale landscapes can have something that is absolutely vital to broad scale landscape design, which is a high resolution aerial photo and a contour map. And that stuff can then be put into 3 dimensions. It's easy. So I mean, 10 years ago, we didn't even have Google Earth. Back then, you know, people like me, and I see Mark, g'day Mark, people like Mark and myself, we used to run off and wait for 2 weeks to get a contact print, aerial contact print, and then we'd get a piece of plastic over the top of that, and we draw contours on it that were at 30 metre height intervals and all this sort of rubbish, and not be able to come up with a half decent plan. Well, that's all changed now, fortunately, and it's available to just about anybody. So geography is very important. We'll talk more about that in terms of marketing later. So water. We've come up with this thing that we need to be blue before we're green and black. Right? You have to have water, otherwise you can't grow things or turn a buck green or be in the black. Someone in Australia said when they described what do they call them, greens. People, members of the Green Party, they described them as watermelons. Green on the outside, red on the inside. And, or pink on the inside in some cases, sitting on the fence. We often say, you know, you can't be green and in the red. It's really important for us to develop systems which are hydrated, photosynthesize, and are profitable, and have a residue of that black, which is money in the bank, and the real money in the bank, which is topsoil development. That's carbon in the ground, which is also black. So that's the way we're on about there. Now, some of you would have heard about this former public enemy number 1. You guys used to make cards up, I think, or you still do. It's, every time there's something happened, there was this bloke who apparently exists, who apparently died. His name was Osama bin Laden. And he used to be public enemy number 1. Well, this one's back on the charts again. It's a raindrop on bare earth. That is the most destructive force that there is. There is nothing more destructive. And unfortunately, we have way too much of it. We have way too much bare ground. Oh, it's not even there. That's why it's... Yeah. Good, I was wondering why you're all looking at me stupid. All right, there you go. I thought so. You thought someone had come in and got us, hadn't you? So I was talking all that conspiracy stuff, which I'm not. I don't go for all that stuff. Anyway, yeah, so what we have here, if we break that down, that's a raindrop hitting the bare soil surface. Now, everyone's heard of, what's that bloke, what comes up must come down? Newton, yep, right? So the lightest, smallest particles there are something called clay. Clay is the lightest, smallest particle. Then comes organic matter, then silt, then sand, right? So what this does is it settles it out. A lot of you would have done in science or something at some stage in your life, or when you were a kid, you would have got soil in a bottle and shaken it up and it would have all settled out, right? And you always know that the organic matter and the clay always settles on the top. Well, that's what this does. And what happens is when the rain drops, and in this part of the world, the rain has high temperature because it's falling in summer, so it has a higher solvent action, and you put some clay on your hands and wash it with cold water. It doesn't come off so easy. Turn the temperature up. It just washes off real well. So, you know, you have these high intensity rain events in this part of the world that fall in summer. And so you have a high solvency. That's why there's so much soil conservation going on. Well, when those little drops of clay come back down, they settle on the soil surface, and over time they build up. And when the sun comes out, and what do you get? Adobe. Yeah. Terracotta in our part of the world, because the sun's so intense, right? So as you know, it just gets worse and worse and worse, and as it goes on, well, it makes it very difficult for plants to germinate through, and as a result, desertification occurs. And believe me, there are plenty of places on the planet that are of the same latitude as here, the same altitude as here, that are very well desertified. So I don't think that it can't happen here. It's something that certainly can. It just may take a little longer. So this is a place that, this is in New Mexico. And I'll just show this. I know this is not New Mexico, but I wanted to show you this because if you think it's really bad, then go down there, right? They get about 4 or 5 inches a year. This is just near Columbus, New Mexico. The t-shirt you get down there is, I collect t-shirts, it's got Pancho Villa on the front, America's first terrorist. And he invaded apparently just there, or anyway. So this here was this last grew something in 1952. It grew cotton. Irrigated cotton. There's all the border check irrigation systems are all there. All the channels are there. It could all be started up tomorrow, except now there's no water in the rivers. It's all 300, 400 feet underground. It's just not economic to draw it up. So that hasn't grown anything since then. So that's what we can do. We're very capable of doing this. We have a wonderful track record of desertifying this planet, right? Now, this is what can happen just by breaking that soil surface. One of my students his client bought a Yeomans plough. I'll show you about that later. And he broke the soil surface with that. That's all he did. He didn't seed it, didn't do anything else. I got 3 inches of rain, and that's the first time anything's grown on that paddock for over 60 years. I think that's pretty remarkable. Right? Now we've got energy flowing. Once this happens, life begets life, and on it goes and on it goes. So, you know, once you start that energy flow, things can start happening. Now, you think, oh, I'm not down there. How about I come back a bit smaller? This is a friend of mine, David Holmgren, who he and Bill Mollison started permaculture design together when David was a student of environmental design at the University of Tasmania, or down there in Hobart. And he lived with Bill. Bill was about 30 years older and, still is, still alive, just. Anyway, he's still going, they still wheel him out, it's incredible. Anyway, this is David's place, and it's about a hectare, so about 2.5 acres. And it's right in town, or just on the edge of town, in a small country town like this. And he's got it pretty well sorted. That's what I'd call a regenerative agricultural system. Yields are way in excess of needs. It's a sequestration system, but it's also a knowledge export system. It produces a lot of stuff. A lot of people go to this property and the first thing they do is, apart from pick their jaw up off the ground, is just go, wow, and why aren't we all doing this? It looks good, it feels good, it's not hippie, you know, there's none of that sort of stuff. It just works, you know, and it's beautiful. It's incredibly functional. A house doesn't use any energy. It's just like the building you have over here, you know, it produces all of its energy. All of the water it needs is there. Everything. And ultimately it will also produce its own fuels. So if you look at the sort of what comes into that? Well, there's just a bit to power a car, that's it. And you don't need to go out much because everything you have is there and when people come to you. Now, if we look at, I took this afternoon, I went on to one of the mapping bits. Right, these properties were taken over by separate people. So David and his wife got this property about the same time as these people moved into there. Now you can see there's a bit of a change in decision making there, right? Same land, same ridge, same rainfall. One's probably full of excuses and mortgaged and unhappy and commuting and doing all of these things, and one is living the life of an enlightened peasant. Yeah, which one's more resilient, folks? Yeah. So water is really important. That's a common thread here, that you have to have the water in the systems to be able to develop them in the way that we see that we need to. And that can happen both on a small scale, the smallest scale, right up to the very largest scale, as we can see here. And we've got a lot of systems that we're working with. I mean, all of my inspiration comes from my clients. I'm very lucky that I work with a huge number of innovative people who are pretty gutsy and are not afraid to go out and do this stuff based on some of the directions that I am fortunate enough to give to them. And we have very, very simple systems. This, I was saying last night, I don't really like doing landscape design like urban design because it's too difficult. There's too many fittings and there's too much stuff. Agricultural landscape design is breathtakingly easy, which might seem a bit funny to you, but that's one of the things that I've really come to. I used to do quite complicated agricultural designs, but as I get older, my designs get simpler and simpler and simpler. That's because you learn feedback. Right? You start to work these systems that you design and you start to understand how much work's involved. Do they make money? Right? Am I just spending money unnecessarily? Am I spending effort unnecessarily? So we strive to make things as simple and as effective and as regenerative as possible. Water is a big flavour in Australia because we do have the most unreliable rainfall in the world and the most unreliable climate. We're a great place for a lot of these things to come out of. So permaculture was developed in Australia for that reason, or land care. Every farmer in Australia is a member of a land care group, which is a community action on land protection and catchment protection organisation. So they go out. So I drive around here, and this. We have a lot of landscapes that look like this. The topography here is very similar to where I come from. Very similar. So I feel very at home. But what I don't see is land care. I don't see that fabric of where people are actually actively involved themselves with very small amount of government assistance, I mean very small, taking it upon themselves to fence off their gullies from their stock, fence off their waterways from their stock, put in shelter belts, restore the biodiversity of systems, start to establish native grasses as part of their whole production system. I could just go on and on. Do integrated farm forestry, all of these things that the landscapes that I see here, many landscapes I see here in North America just aren't doing. And I could go out, and policymakers can go out there as much as they like trying to make changes to that, but really it's got to happen from the farmer themselves. The farmer's got to want to do that, and land care is a great model for that to occur. Kaline is another technology that was developed because of that. We need to overcome drought in Australia. If we don't deal with the water issue and the vagaries of our climate, then we're not on our landscapes. So this is a landscape that Yeomans bought in about 1955, I think, and then developed it. And you can see all of these ponds are all interlinked. So one flows to the other, to the other, to the other. So you're actually keeping the water in the landscape for as long as it can. And this is an advancement on soil conservation. You'll also notice that some of the dams are actually not in valleys. I've not seen yet a dam in Iowa, and I've looked at a lot in the plain on the way here, have my eyes sort of glued as I do. No dams on anything but a valley. We prefer to build dams, or ponds as you call them, out of the valleys and actually on the ridges, where they're up high and you generate better gravity from them, etc. Now this property is right on the edge of Sydney. Yeomans bought it, he bought all of his properties within driving distance of Sydney. Well, Sydney's grown a bit now, and so Sydney has now found that this property was sold in 2007 for $40.2 million, or $52,000 an acre, right? It's still agricultural land. It's going to be carved up and converted into a nursing home. I did a bit of a blueprint based on Yeomans' 1972 book, The City Forest, in which he used the same sort of landscape treatments to bring water into the urban landscape. He used the hardscaping in urban landscapes to actually harvest and bring their own water. So instead of damming rivers and large creeks and involving ourselves with pumping systems, all of these degenerative enterprises and infrastructure actually put it all there and use something called gravity. You've heard of the thing called the moon? It's really bright tonight. It does this thing called gravity for us. Water moves with gravity. So if only you place these items in the right place, then you can get all of these advantages to your system. Anyway, access. Who's been to Europe? Oh, good. Few Americans have passports, and that's good. A lot of you in Europe would have seen some very old roads. You go to, many of you been to Rome? Yeah, it's in the I love going to the Circus Maximus. Remember, any of you watch Ben-Hur, the 1952 Charlton Heston classic? Burt Lancaster, I think, on one of the two. Anyway, that's still there. It was built 2,000 years ago or so, and the earth moving is as perfect as it was when it was built. All of the roads throughout Europe, many of them are Roman roads. The cuts are still there. The rural roads are Roman roads. So my point is that when you build a road, they don't go away. You have to actually go out of your way to get rid of them. And you would have seen when highways have been redeveloped, you see that old road that there was. Yeah, it's grown over a bit, but the earthworks are still there. So you've got to be really considerate of roads, and that's one of the reasons why you had a no roads policy come into national parks. I think it was under Clinton. Right? So we follow you guys. We know we call ourselves the 51st state. I was named. This is the crazy thing I was saying the other night. I was named after Darren in Bewitched. I mean, isn't that tragic? Durwood. Anyway, how did I digress? Access. So access doesn't go away. And what happens is, when you build access in the wrong place, it forever challenges the water cycle. It can cause tremendous amounts of erosion. But if you do it right from the start, a road can be a tremendous can be a tremendous asset to your system, because if you put it in the right place, it can actually harvest water, as we do here. You can see these farm roads. We don't just go and put a road in any willy-nilly, A to B sort of position. We put our roads right along the centre line of ridges, or when we go across slope, we put a very gentle gradient on them so they harvest water, as you can see here. That road is about 80 yards long, and it fills a 1 acre foot pond. Just the water that is caught on that road. Right? And just anybody who's been out, you've all been out when it rains, and you've looked at roads and you've seen the gutters running water. Hard surfaces catch a lot of water. A road is almost as efficient a catchment surface as the roof on this building. Right? A tarmac road is as efficient. And yet, you know, we cry that we don't have water in our storages, or we have all of these problems with drought, but we have these inordinate plumbing systems, landscape plumbing systems, that just get rid of the water where it falls. It's really crazy. We put ourselves in a bit of a quandary there. But we're still building roads and we're still building access, so, you know, now you know, you don't have any excuse. Right. Forestry is another thing. I think of all agricultural landscapes as being forests. Now, this part of the world, in my belief, my opinion, should be an open, woody savanna. A prairie, a wooded savanna. That's what it was, and that's what it should be again. How do we configure that so that we can still grow our annual crops? Well, that's just a matter of configuring the way we place species in the system. It can be a wide space system like we've got here. This is in Spain. It's in one of my favourite systems. It's called the Dehesa. It's Dehesa. And it's the famed cork pork system, or holm oak system, that produces the very famous and tremendously expensive jamón ibérico de Biota, which is the leg ham that's produced from the pigs that are finished, the famous black pigs, which are finished on acorns. Beautiful stuff. Sells for up to 180 euros a kilogram. So you don't, as I was saying last night, when you have a plate of food in Spain, it's not dominated by a big slab of meat. When you buy this stuff, you have a few slivers. You respect this stuff, right? You don't need much of it because it's so nutrient dense. That's what I call respect of animal and respect of food, that your food becomes a real gastronomic experience. It's really important, especially when it comes from places like that. That's been described as the most sustainable agricultural system on the earth by actually the Emeritus Professor of Agriculture at the University of Melbourne, David E. Smith, in his book Natural Game. It's a very, very, very low entropy system, and it goes for, you can imagine Ohio, Iowa or Ohio in total, that's about the area this landscape takes up. So we can have that sort of thing. We've got the models there. This is more tree crops. We've got systems where we integrate into tree crops other systems, such as this, where we've got olives, which I know don't grow here, but we've got olives mixed in with alfalfa. So we do a lot of that sort of very basic polyculture work and so on. We also do a lot of work with forestry, with, you know, because there's all different types of forest. There's wide-spaced forest, there's wide-spaced avenues of trees, there's woodlands, there's orchards, there's block plantings, there's riparian plantings, you know, plantings along rivers and creeks. And then there's all of the things that you can do with that. So in this picture here, you can see that we've got, that's only 15 years old, that forest. That's one that we put in about 15 years ago. And we've now got 6 different age classes in that, or height classes in it. It's a perpetual forest. It's not one where we come in and take everything at once. We use this age-old art called coppicing. So you select trees for a particular target, and then you manage the regrowth and prune it back to one stem. A lot of the species that you have here in the US do that as well. So now, instead of just having a forest that's all one height and only one yield at a time, now you can get ongoing yields. You can have something coming out of that forest all the time. That's the way we've done things for a long time. So we do everything from mycology. This is some eucalyptus that we're growing actually that have got shiitake mushrooms growing on them. You know, it's got that faint flavour of euc in it, but it's that's good. And then this is all willows. There's some faggots of willow that are being used for tool handles and for charcoal and for planting more willows, and all of these different things that we can do. There's also, you know, this revolution in machinery, and we've got this stuff like here, the Lucas mill, which is a portable sawmill, and the Logasol mill from Sweden, which is a chainsaw mill, that allow us to, as farmers, as people who are managing as land managers, buy relatively cheap equipment and value add these systems on farm. In fact, you can get a tremendous amount of value when you fell trees and then season the timber, or lumber as you call it. And we've got a whole lot of different techniques that we've got, and I was so happy when I went over into the centre, and I went around last night and I took a photo of took 3 photos of every table, because I'm a timber nut, believe me. And I've already put them on my Facebook and everything. All my friends are saying, wow, we want more photos. So now I've had to upload all of the photos of all of those pictures, of all of the different, because you've got, I don't know if you know, but in the centre over there, they've got a different species table of every species that grows in this region. I think, what a great thing to do.
Not quite.
Not quite.
It's a different, each table comes from a different plant family, all within about 100.
Oh, right, so you haven't got it, you need more tables, in other words. Yeah, well maybe you need to work on the chairs for the tables. Yeah. In any case, we're really into that. This is one of my friends, Charlie Bovolino. He revolutionised the way we did small, farm-based processing. So he developed the use of refrigerated ship containers, aluminum ship containers. And he put a dehumidifier on them. So it just extracts the moisture out really slowly and produces 8% moisture timber. Really good stuff. And it enables you to make, this is a 6 species table. You don't lift, this is the table that takes 3 people to lift. It's a very, very heavy table. Your timbers are quite light, we've found. All right, let's get to buildings. Now, William McDonough, who some of you would have heard of, a well-known American ecological architect, and he's come up with this thing called Cradle to Cradle with some colleagues of his. I met him in Mallorca a couple of years ago, and he said to me, if humans are so smart, why did it take us 5,000 years to put wheels on our luggage? And I think, well, let's take that to the next step. If we're so smart, why has it taken us so long before we've put our dairy on wheels? Or any of our farm infrastructure on wheels? These are 2 dairies. This is an Italian one, an Italian job, as it were, up the top there. And we've just built one of these on one of our farms, where we actually take the infrastructure to the animals, not the animals to the infrastructure. Right, that has massive ramifications when you think about it. The one on the bottom is a 500 head dairy. What they did there, they actually dismantled their existing herringbone dairy and put it on wheels, put it on a chassis and put it on wheels. And so now, as the animals rotate through the system, the dairy gets put in a place, and what do? All they take away is milk. Don't have all of the effluent ponds, don't have all of that rubbish, don't have the pollution, because the dairy is always moving. You're not creating a system that toxifies the landscape, right? We've got to really that's what I mean about rethinking all of this, retooling. I think it's probably a fair thing to think, if you've got a building, think of what you could do if you put wheels on it. Any farm building. What could I do if I could actually move it? Just as a bit of what we call in permaculture random assembly. Yeah? So we've got all that. One of my good friends, Joel Salatin, who's in a place called Swoop, Virginia, he's got really funky buildings. He's sort of the master of marginal reaction. How can I build the worst looking infrastructure and make the biggest buck out of it? Almost as if he's teasing people. As most of us would know, a chook or a chicken, you call them chickens, we call them chooks, spelt chook. chook, C-H-O-O-K. A chook has never graduated from an architecture school. You don't see the chook sitting down reading Architectural Digest. I'm here to tell you, the cows and the chooks and the pigs and all the other animals don't really care about architecture. They do care about being comfortable. They do care about not being toxified. They do care about being looked after. And they're things that we don't do very well, especially these days with the rise of confinement agriculture. So these are buildings that do that. And these are buildings and systems where animals are taking a really big part in it. I mean, this is a great system. It's called the pig aerator. And I was driving past your compost system this morning and I saw this poor man there labouring away. I mean, people don't like farming for that reason. I mean, people don't like it. That's why a lot of people have given up farming, because they can remember when they worked on their grandparents' farm and it was just drudgery. You were a glorified shit shoveler, right? You're just moving manure all the time, handling this stuff, right? Or people who do a permaculture thing, they love, you know, they make compost and you start to develop this permaculture physique, right? Which is all about shoveling things, and, you know, you become the animal and all this sort of stuff. Yeah, right. Just forget that one. Get a pig. You don't have to eat it. I was talking to someone yesterday about people in India. They got a bit of a problem because the Hindus don't eat the cows. The problem was the partitioning. You see, because apparently the Christians used to trade the cows to the Muslims, and so that's all with the partitioning that's broken down. So even if you're a vegetarian, you can still have these systems. Just develop a relationship with somebody who does use the surplus. There's a lot of potential there. Yeah? We spend a lot of effort, and believe me, you know, we won't be able to do the things that we're doing now with machinery in future because the oil will just be too expensive. Well, if we have to leave it to our good friend here to produce all of the gasoline, or you know, biodiesel, it's going to come at a cost, and there's not going to be that much going around. So we're going to have to get a bit smarter about how we husband the animals that we share this place with to perform some vital functions that are needed, such as cycling nutrients. There's no such thing, well, tell me if there is, as a vegetarian ecology. Yeah, thought it'd be silent. There's no such thing. So animals always have a part to play, whether it's us, whether it's earthworms, whether it's soil biota, or whether it's all sorts of other fowl or animals, right? So it's a matter of, I think, treating them with the greatest deal of respect. If you don't want to eat them, don't eat them. Don't have that sort of production system, right? There's lots of different ways that you can do all of this stuff. These are more buildings. Again, that's a beautiful building. I love that one. That's called the Millennium Feather Net. It's a beautiful, we just built one at a farm in Australia. It took, how about this? People go out, I've got a client in the UK who's a lord. He owns, he's a Viscount. He owns 17,000 hectares of land an hour from London, right? So his land's worth a bit, right? Anyway, his farm, they bought this portable chicken shelter, right? It carries, it's for layers, for egg producers. And it's all mechanised. So the chickens come in and they lay their eggs on this plastic, it's like artificial turf. They sit their little bums down there and whoop, whoop, and out they go, do their egg, and then the egg goes onto a slow-moving conveyor, and then the eggs go into this and they get put automatically into these boxes. That whole thing cost about £30,000 or so. Right, and that's a free-range egg system. A lot of money, right? Now, we built one of these the other day. We went and knocked about 5 or 6 trees over. We dragged them down. We got the Lucas mill out. We milled up the trees, so the whole process, I'll cut to the chase, took 2 days with 2 people. And cost, well, it didn't cost anything apart from the fuel for the chainsaw and the Lucas mill, which was probably about, let's say, $50. It's not noticeable, these things, right? But the biggest expense was the roofing line. That was it. And the coach bolts to pull the whole thing together. It was so breathtakingly easy to put together. So, you know, if we spent $3,000, it was nothing. And we're in the chicken business. And now that particular, I call it a machine because it's like a machine, that thing tows behind someone else's herd of livestock as a complementary enterprise and cleans up all the parasites and cleans up all the poo and does a fantastic job and turns it into eggs. That's pretty cool, isn't it? Yeah. Fencing. That's 750 cows. Now, if I stood here 70 years ago and I said I could keep 750 cows close together with 2 millimetres of wire, you would think that that would be, you know, crazy. Some form of heresy or whatever you want to call it, just stupidity. But if you pass electrons through it that are excited, then that's the most terrifying thing on the planet to those organisms. It's called an electric fence. Who here's been stung by an electric fence? Yeah. Who here remembers the first time they got stung by an electric fence? Right. Yeah, it's something that's quite memorable. Most of us, who here did that with their nose or with their lips or some part of their head the first time they did it? Good, right? Your parents didn't set you that trap. Good. Well, that's what happens to these guys. So once that happens, that thing is terrifying. I say the worst place to get hit with an electric fence is in your head. I think there's other parts that I would prefer not as well. I have heard. Yeah. Be careful of peeing on the electric fence is the sub-story there. Yeah. It's conductive, I'm apparently told. Now, this fence here, can anyone tell me what that would be a fence for, the one on the left-hand side? Sorry? Pigs. Now, how much effort have we put in over hundreds of years to confine pigs? They're impossible to confine. But here again, just tiny little wire is the most terrifying thing to these just basically animals of skin with a few hairs on them, right? With a super sensitive nose. So it's quite remarkable. And that we can use things like nylon rope around a tree when we go into forests. I mean, I look at all of these blocks of forest that people have on their farms around here and I thought, they've got hickory. I mean, I would love to have all that stuff. It'll take me 150 years to be able to create the forest that you just have lying languishing in your back 40. That you've got acorns falling, about 6 or 7 types of bloody acorns, and you've got hickory. You've even got, they're called pig nuts. You've got chestnuts. You've got all of these different things. You've got persimmons, mulberries. All of these things are just falling on the ground, and the forests are dying for a lack of disturbance. Yeah, and we put pigs in concrete bunkers, and I won't go on. It's just too insane. Anyway, all right, more pigs. This is another farmer of mine. They've got 250 hectares, about 600 acres of pigs, all on pasture. So they grow pigs, which they have on their pasture. They move them. All of these little buildings that they have. They come around with the tractor and they just get the forks on the tractor and just lift the building and they just detach the watering system and they just go from place to place, all fenced off with these very lightweight, almost invisible fencing systems that can be detached at any time. That's a great use for a trampoline spring, by the way. You know when your trampoline breaks down? We use them all the time to give your fence a bit of spring. Yeah. So we can use it. Now, soils, easily destroyed, and fortunately easily created. It's not something that humans have mastered. We don't have a great track record as being soil creators. It's not something where we've been known to leave in our wake of destruction as we've gone around the place. Well, that's all about to change, because you're all going to remember this, I know. What do we need to form soil? Right, well, the first thing's pretty generally available. Sunlight, air and water, pretty accessible for most people. Next thing is biologically available minerals. So that's not something that comes in a white tank that's sort of roaming around the landscape at the moment. Yeah. That's actually the antithesis of what we're talking about here. There's a dark side to this, and, well, I'd have to say there's an antibiotic way of doing things and there's a probiotic way of doing things. Believe me, that side hasn't got any future. Anything that's based on any fossil fuel does not have a future. It's just a temporary blip. And we're already seeing that in places like Europe. I mean, Europe is very interesting because their fuel prices are already much higher than what they are here. And they're paying in the order of $2 to $2.50 a litre. Right? Times that by 4 and you get per gallon. We pay close to $1.50 per litre for our fuels. In Europe, the pressure from the Russians and in terms of natural gas production is radically increasing the prices of things like urea and the stuff that you put around the place, anhydrous ammonia. All of these things which come from natural gas. You just can't do that anymore, and there's too many competing forces. So it's a temporary phenomenon, so people need to move on to something that works a lot better, and that's called biology. We have come a long way in our understanding of how to do very economic, farm-based systems that feed us the nutrients that our plants need in very productive agricultural systems. So the development of techniques to make biologically available minerals are really important. We need living things in the soil. So as I said, we need to be probiotic. But then we also need their byproducts. We also need living things on the soil, right? That's where the animals come in. So we need all of their byproducts. We also need intermittent and patchy disturbance regimes. Now, if we go back to when our Indigenous brothers and sisters were in control of this place, they did that, as did in Africa and Australia and other places of savanna, using tools such as fire and hunting, predation. So they're able to have very high densities of livestock maraud across a landscape and get what we call animal impact. We don't have that anymore. We use ploughs and we use too frequent a fire. We plough the same place every year or every couple of years. So it's not intermittent, it's not patchy, and it's beyond disturbance. Right? It's like we're putting a glacier through the landscape every year. Does anyone know what the disc plough was originally invented for? To do? It was invented, and it failed at doing so in Europe, to move snow. It was a snow plough. And then they discovered when they turned it, it tears up soil. It does a better job than an old moldboard plough, and it rides over stumps and all of that sort of thing. So we'll put that to work. I saw one the other day on a farm, and it was a classic. Because usually what happens is, what people end up doing is putting weights on their disc plough. Because their soil gets that hard that they need to get that on there in order for it to dig into the ground. I saw one the other day, they even had recesses the manufacturer had put on it, as if to say this is the inevitable consequence of the use of this revolting machine. It's interesting, isn't it, when you unravel it? And you go to farmers, I go to farmers all over the world, and they say, gee, I can't remember there being that many rocks when I was a kid. Where's all the soil gone? Every millimetre of soil that we lose is 10 cubic yards. per hectare. Yeah. It's a lot of soil. Go and make 10 cubic yards of compost by hand. Then you'll gain some respect. Yeah. It takes a lot of work to make a millimetre of soil. It's a lot of processes. So we need to master it. How do we form soil? There's lots of techniques for rejuvenating soils. We use the Yeomans plough. You can use any subsoil or a chisel plough, any of these things. There's about, we think, there's about 40 or 45 different techniques, tools that we know of that can accelerate soil formation. So it's not a matter of not having them, right? There's plenty of tools, and these are just some of them. Using ploughs judiciously to aerate the soil, to break compaction. Using things like no-till without herbicides, or no-till using a declining amount of herbicide, so that herbicide is not, you're not on the gerbil wheel of farming with a pH, pharmaceutical farming, but you're actually on a pathway to farming with biology. It's very difficult to, if you are a farmer who has a farm now and you're using all of the pharmacological side of agriculture, and then you want to transition over to being biological, because you've got to get your soil is dead. You've got to build up all of the organisms. You've got to build the life support system. So that takes some time. You can't just throw away all of your tools, such as herbicide and fertilisers necessarily, because you may well end up being off that farm. So what we suggest to people is, all right, we'll go on a program. Do it rationally and go through that process such that you do things as a means to an end. As De Bono said, you should begin with the end in mind. Yeah? So we've got farmers who've started off, people who have $200,000, $300,000 a year chemical bills to having zero chemical bills, and they do that over a 5 to 10 year period. And then their carbon levels go up, and everything gets better. Their life gets better, their health gets better, the farm looks better, it's got ground cover all the time, they're growing more crops, they're starting to integrate animals in there, so they're starting to build resilience into the economic system of their property. It's not just growing 1 or 2 crops. So there's all of these things that build the resilience into it. And you've got techniques here that have been developed. The Rodale Institute, I think Jeff Moy, has he spoken over here? Yeah? No. They've developed this crop roller, which is a great machine. We've got a manufacturer down in Mexico, in Guadalajara, is making these for peasant farmers. Actually ones that run behind a donkey, and great little systems. And inspired by this technology, growing a crop, a winter crop of barley or oats or rye corn or wheat or something like that, or vetch, and then using this roller, which is ingeniously developed to actually crimp. When you get a plastic hose and you crimp it, and it gets a memory effect in it. Well, what we're doing here is we're breaking the sap flow, or stopping the sap flow at the plant's most vulnerable time, which is just as it's about to flower, and that stops the sap flow, kills the plant. So now you've got a folded down mulch. You've got the seeder on behind, and away you go. I mean, that's just ingenious. So, you can do these things. It's not a technological issue. It's an innovation issue, and there's plenty of innovators out there, and farmers are the greatest innovators I've found, because they just put their minds to work. They're always observing, and if they've got a good workshop, well, they can tinker. This is another technique that's been developed in Australia, and it's a system which is very advanced. It's called pasture cropping, or no-kill cropping. It's where you actually don't even till, you just grow the cereals directly into existing pasture. But you can't do it unless you have an animal husbandry system that goes with it to manage the sward, to give you the fertiliser, to give you the cycling of nutrients, and to manage the system so that you get perennial pastures. You can't do it either unless you get a depth of soil. Now, these are two brothers soil samples. Now, the one on the right, sorry, I'm dyslexic, so I have to just convince myself. So the one on the right is one brother and this is the other. Both on the same ridge, Now, one's been doing pasture cropping for 10 years, the other one has just been doing conventional set stocking, which is where you have animals in a paddock for a very long time, not rotationally grazed, and has been doing conventional tillage, conventional agriculture using fertilisers and chemistry and all the rest of it. Chemicals, pardon me. Now, one has sequestered 30 tonnes of carbon dioxide per hectare per year, and the other hasn't. One has built about 3 feet of soil, and the other one hasn't in that period of time. And one is producing the district average of cereals, and the other one is, but one's doing it with a cost of only about $50 per hectare in total production costs, compared to the other one who's spending close to $180 a hectare. Right? So there's all of these different vulnerabilities. One is atrophic and one is regenerative. Right? If this guy here, as I was talking today, if this guy here grew his own canola or oilseed crop, we've got a group of farmers who own a lot of land, and they all put in together and they bought an oilseed press and make their own biodiesel. They devote 6 to 7% of their canola crop to producing their own fuel. So they're completely energy independent now, right? Which is fantastic. So, you know, when you get to that point, you are getting pretty regenerative. It's looking pretty good. All right, marketing. Getting down to the end here. Marketing is real, or poly-marketing as we call it, because there's lots of different spheres of all of this, and our capacity to access markets has never been better. So, especially since the advent of these things, right? These are pretty amazing things, these smartphones. I've got a little PayPal device now that you just plug in there and it can be a credit card reader, for goodness sake. So we've got all of this stuff, so the capacity for a farmer, a producer, to be in a relationship of length with a consumer has never really been any easier. You can take people's money really easy these days, right? Instantaneously. Right, so we've got that. We've also got something called the internet. You might have heard of it. It's really good. You can go, well, here's one. This is called a buying club. My client here has just downloaded some stock images of different cuts of produce and of meat, and he sells them online. That's through a website called Shopify.com. You can go on there, and in about 15 or 20 minutes, you just, you know, drag and drop all of your photos of whatever you want or whatever you're going to sell, give it a price, got an inventory in the background. So if you've got 20 steaks, well, you can say you've got 20 steaks this week. People go online, they swipe their life away, and the goods get delivered to them. Right, now that, for people who are older producers who are a bit internet phobic or computer phobic or computer illiterate, it doesn't matter, just find a kid and incentivise them. That's the best thing to do, and then you'll get on board. And so there's this whole local thing. I saw in the Whole Foods last night, they've still got a poster up from March from an event there where talking about the whole local food thing. There's quite a buzz around this, and here in the United States, I'd have to say that here in the Western world, you're probably, with the exception of some of the European countries who have been doing localised marketing for a long time, the sort of locavore sort of movement is at its strongest here in the US. And the great thing is, for you guys, is your population distribution as compared to places like Australia. If you go to a place, if you go to the equivalent places in Australia like Iowa, then we don't have every 20 minutes a population of 5 or 10,000 people. We just don't have that. You'll have a population of 500 people every 20 minutes. So here, in that transition, if we look at all of the farms around here, as you break it all down, there's a high potential access to populations of consumers. And that's something that's a real advantage to you. So the geography that you have here is a tremendous advantage to the conversion of these systems into being places where farmers, producers are price setters, not price receivers. And it also extends into ecosystem services. As I mentioned before, farms produce or can pollute waterways. As I said yesterday to somebody, don't do a Google on groundwater pollution. It's not a good look. And look at all of the stuff. It's all agricultural toxins that have made their way down through the soil profile into our precious groundwaters. And unfortunately, we bring them back up and then have to filter the hell out of them, or lie that the stuff doesn't exist. We talked about today. There's a lot of pollution in these groundwaters, so yeah, it's not good. Same thing though, we can turn that on its head. If we increase the amount of carbon in our soils, if we do all of these things, then we can actually start to monetize the ecosystem services that these landscapes produce. Whether it's clean water, whether it's reducing the amount of sulfur dioxide pollution, nitrous oxide pollution, etc. As you can see in our country, our farmers are getting paid now, if they do the right thing, $23 a metric tonne for carbon dioxide sequestration. Right? So that's just one example of one type of ecosystem service that's being monetised. And energy. So nothing is as fleeting as a photon of light. Nothing. Here and it's gone. Right? And what we are, again, not that good at is promoting photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is what really drives most of the stuff that we're doing, whether it's our use of fossil fuels. All of those things that we use did photosynthesize at one stage. So it's really important that we enhance it and improve it. And do all of this stuff. Doesn't matter if you believe it or not in climate change, but we have to get sexy. So what does that mean? Well, the target is that we have to get back to pre-industrial levels of atmospheric CO2. And that's around 270 to 300 parts per million. Now, we know from the Food and Agriculture Organisation of the United Nations that about 12% of our Earth's terrestrial surface is covered in arable land. So we've calculated that if we increase the organic carbon content by 1.6% in 1 foot of soil across all of that, then that would be enough of a download to stop global warming in its tracks. Just like that. That would be too bad. Yeah. So you have to put those little tanks away. Those tanks, they'll have to be converted into water carts or something. Yeah, they have to be put away because conventional agriculture is completely antagonistic to organic carbon and the carbon cycle. I don't need to repeat that, do I? Yeah, it's just completely antagonistic. So that needs to change. And it needs to be supported. And it needs to be respected and understood. So that's something that's really important. We don't pay, and we're still not paying for what's going to happen. So we need to also understand in all of this, if we're going to become sexy, then what we've got to do is we've got to understand what works best. What's the most efficient way of sequestering carbon? And it happens to be the use of perennial grasses. Perennial grasses are the fastest sequesterers of carbon that we know of. It's just a simple physiological fact. They're very, very fast. They put most of their energy that they generate from photosynthesis into the production of exudates, which are long-chain polysaccharides, which are exuded out of the root systems and they basically fuel the economy of the soil. Right? And then they are cycled and they turn blue and green into black. Right? Imagine if our economy functioned like a grass does, or a forest did. Look at a grass. Sequesters all of this carbon, right, out of the atmosphere, runs completely on solar energy, it takes a bit of water, a bit of hydrogen, right, converts that into sugar, glucose, emits it out its root system freely so that all of its friends and supporters can support it by bringing minerals to it, puts a bit away as a perennial grass right near the root crown. Actually, puts a bit in its bank account. So that when it's grazed, which creates another economy on the soil surface, that it can actually use some of that energy to spring forth again. Imagine if our economy worked like that. Yeehaw. Now a tree puts most of its carbon in itself. And most of the cycling of carbon in a forest system is actually close to the soil surface, right? So that's not to say that we shouldn't grow trees for carbon sequestration, but they are not the fastest thing on the block. They're not as efficient. So what we need to have is forested agricultural systems, because trees are great at moderating climate, giving us shelter, giving us timber products, giving us food products, giving us all of these different things, modifying our climate, stabilising our systems. So we need to do that as well. It's really important. So, yeah, we need to do the download. All right. And that download starts to look like this. This is one of our farms that we developed, we've been developing since about 2008. So this is 2009, this picture. Yep, just a 500-acre family farm, right? Average, got the back 40 you can see. We have back 40s in Australia too. A bit of bush up the back. There's the farmhouse. It's mostly pasture, bit of crop here and there, but mostly pasture. Used to run forever 30 Angus, because that's what it had always run. So that's what it always runs, right? Yeah. Well, we actually measured how much grass there was, and we worked out there was enough for about 120, but that's another matter. So we got to work on hydrating the place. So you can see we built a pond and that's actually a road to the right-hand side there. We started to interlink. You can see the creek down the middle here, just near the cursor here. We fenced it off and we put a chain of ponds in there, so that's become a real wildlife zone. It's looking fantastic. This system worked so well, we thought we'd put another one in, and then we started to develop the place. This is about a month ago. We put a pond in right up the top of the property, so that drives all of the water system. So we've got a completely reticulated water system here. Now you can go anywhere on that farm and put a pipe into a pipe and generate gravity out of that pipe. And it could happen exactly here. This is exactly the same sort of topography as you have here, right? On about 20-inch rainfall, not 30 or 40-inch rainfall, right? So there's no drought on this property anymore, none. And so much so that we had a little field day a couple of weeks ago. We got 1,000 people there because they thought, gee, this is really good. So there's people who actually want to come and see this stuff if you build it. It's great because there's so few examples out there. I might have done all of these thousands of farms, but that's a pumpteen. We've got 150,000 farms in Australia. About 5,000 or 6,000 practice what we might call techniques of regenerative agriculture. That's not very many. And I'm sure it's probably a similar or less percentage here in this country. So you can drive for days and not see anything half exciting. You can just, I just drive around thinking, how could I improve this place? Oh my goodness, just let me have a crack, Yeah. Anyway, all right, well, we'll close up. So, a regenerative economy. How are we going to suffer our way through that? Wonderful thought. Well, first up, you need to meet your farmer and the farmer needs to meet your consumer. Right? They need to come together. Don't expect that the current system will do that for you, because that is not what it's about. The current system is not there to make farmers wealthier. The purpose of cities is to keep farmers out of the country. That's what it's there for. That's been the purpose of cities for a very, very long time. Very long time. They're just places where farmers ultimately end up. So that needs to change. Because we can't have these landscapes regenerated if we don't have people in them. And those people need to be recompensed. That's the repopulation part of this. We need to repopulate our rural landscapes. We need to subsidise all of the type of regenerative agriculture courses that we have, because this is not something you just wake up and start doing. You need some education to learn how to do that. And I'm really so enthused that these guys, with their fantastic program, I'd like to give a great thanks for that. What a program. You know, one of the best generalist programs for the new what do I call it? The Regrarians that I've just come up with. This is what happens when you fly. Come up with these bright ideas. We need to subsidise carbon baseline assessment. So we need to come onto properties now, and the NRCS or Departments of Agriculture, they have all of the wizardry right now. They can come onto your property and measure all of this stuff instead of telling you how to denude your property of carbon. They need to be showing you how to actually sequester it. I think it's a global responsibility that needs to happen right now. Not difficult. We've known how to measure carbon for a long time. Does everyone know how to do it? It's really simple. You take a sample, and then you measure the bulk density, which is the volume per the weight per volume, and then you incinerate the sample, because the carbon's the bit that burns, and then you weigh it again. How hard's that? We've been doing that since about 1840. Go to carboncoalition.org. There's the Carbon Challenge. There's a guy driving an old school bus around America showing farmers how to do it themselves. Fantastic. We also need to, as I mentioned, develop entrepreneurial nutrient cycling engines. So we need, like this place here, I look at the amount of nutrient that is coming through this facility here, this kitchen, and then is leaving it, right? These are all, that's what cities are. They're nutrient sinks, they're energy sinks. So it's our responsibility, once we know, to try and develop some sort of business around that, whether it's the biodiesel business, or whether it's the food business, all of the food refuse being put through biodigesters and combined with minerals and then used as a biofertiliser. We know how to do all that stuff and produce energy at the same time. So we've got all that stuff, we can do it. It just needs to be a bit of business around it. We need to invest in regenerative infrastructure. That's something we've been really bad on. Farmers in particular, and any community, they've been really good at investing in infrastructure that is degenerative, right? Or when they do invest in infrastructure that's degenerative, they spend way too much of it. Whether it's a big new chicken shed or a pig shed or a dairy or one of those tube things that you hold all your corn in or whatever. Those things, all those things, right? They're all degenerative infrastructure that destroy the capacity for people to stay in the landscapes because they cause something called debt. And debt kills rural societies. Buy local first. Quite a manifesto, isn't it? We need to build regional producer atlases. You have to know who's out there doing this stuff. And it's a great thing, once you get a customer in this sort of program, it's pretty hard to lose them. You'd have to murder their child or something, right? Once you develop a direct relationship with the person who's producing the food for you and the person who's consuming your food, well, you become friends. It's not some faceless enterprise that we're mostly, unfortunately, familiar with. And we need to be strategic, pragmatic, and incremental. And most of all, we need to cover our soil and photosynthesize as much as we can. And with that thought, I'd like to thank you and give you my plugs at the end here, because my wife insists, Facebooky stuff and all that. So there you go. Thank you.